It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and today we're taking a look at the 5 releases of December 14th, 2007. And we got a couple of big new movies to talk about here, including one of Will Smith's biggest hits, an adaptation of the classic story of the Omega Man, done with a new twist with the story by Richard Matheson. We also have a movie version of a popular cartoon that I grew up with in the 80s that also holds a very significant, this movie in particular holds a very significant piece of movie history in terms of me in particular. And I'll delve into that as we go along. But we also have a holiday movie being released just a mere less than 2 weeks before Christmas, which is almost never a good sign. We also have Mark Forster's adaptation of The Kite Runner, and also Francis Ford Coppola's newest film, Youth Without You. But before we get to any of those movies, let's talk about the biggest new release of the weekend, and it was actually a whole lot closer than people would have expected, but we'll save that for the next movie. But it's Will Smith starring in I Am Legend. So, based off of the 1954 book by Richard Matheson, this is taking place in New York City 5 years after a deadly outbreak happens. And, of course, this was released in 2007, so that's where the 5-year difference comes into play here. And you have it was a virus that was originally designated to cure cancer, and it's wiped out most of mankind, leaving Robert Neville, played by Will Smith, as the last human in New York, other than nocturnal mutants. Neville is immune to the virus, and he works to develop a cure while defending himself against the hostile mutants. And it's the third feature film adaptation of this, based off of this story, the first two being The Last Man on Earth from 1964 and The Omega Man in 1971. And, of course, The Simpsons did this version for one of their Treehouse of Horror episodes. That was my introduction to the story, as with most people's introduction to the story. And it's a film that is still pretty damn good. It's a film that still holds up over time. It's a very engaging film. Will Smith is the main guy throughout much of the movie, and you're watching him going through all of this. Like, he's having the time of his life being on his own for most of the majority of the movie with his dog friend. And yeah, it's the good life, man. Like, you being the last person on Earth, and all of a sudden you get to do whatever you want, but you're also trying to get people out there, if there's still some survivors out there, to let you know that you're there. And of course, you got to deal with all these mutants all over the place, and they do a very good job of creating an engaging adventure, an engaging thriller all across the board here. And yeah, it's not afraid to go dark at times, too. I mean, the dog gets infected by the mutants, and yeah, he's got to have a scene where he's unfortunately got to get rid of the dog, and yeah, it's about as traumatic and as sad as you can get. I'm still thinking about that, even after all these years later, man. It's a really, really rough scene to watch. I mean, if you're a dog lover, yeah, it's very, very hard to watch, but he really doesn't have a choice in this situation here, and it's just like, he's trying to figure out a cure for this whole thing, and it does differentiate from the novel. It's a very different kind of film, especially with the ending in general. The ending, I will say, is a little bit anticlimactic, if you will. There's a whole thing, because in the theatrical version, the whole thing is that, the Dark Seekers attack the lab, and Neville's trying to, let the Dark Seeker know that, he can cure him, and, he's trying to, he's trying to save them all, and like there's a point where he has to basically sacrifice his own life to save the two that still have the cure inside of them, and so he kills himself off, and then he goes to and then the survivors go off to the camp, and that's when they're getting handed the cure for a chance to save humanity once again. In the original version, Neville, in the alternate ending, there's a version where Neville survives it, and he survives, and he abandons the research altogether and heads along with these the two that he meets, Anna and Ethan, played by Alison Braga and Charlie Talon, who they go off and finding the survivors colony, and there's the monologue at the end, just like about how you're not alone and all that, and it's a weird situation here, because yeah, the first one seems a little too anticlimactic overall, but the second ending doesn't feel like it's any better either. In fact, that ending I mentioned, the alternate ending, was taken out because of the negative test screening reactions that it got, and apparently that was enough. And apparently the sequel that's coming out soon, that's where they're coming off at. That's where they're moving on from. That's the one that they're going to continue the story from, is the alternate ending, which feels really weird to do that, but I mean, it's a really tough call on which ending is better. If I had to pick one of them, I like that it is I think it's better as a standalone film in general. To continue the story in an alternate ending like this, with the alternate ending, I feel like is a little bit much overall, and it just feels like they're opening it up for an eventual sequel that nobody really knew what was going to happen, and I don't think anybody really knew it was going to be this big of a hit overall, because it was a massive hit when it came out, and they've been talking about doing a sequel for years, but apparently it's now moving closer than ever because Michael B. Jordan is currently attached to produce the film and star in it as well. And let me see if there's anything new in terms of this development here. It says that Stephen Caple Jr. is in talks to direct a sequel. Of course, he did Creed 2, and most recently he did Transformers Rise of the Beast. So it looks like they're getting closer and closer to doing the sequel, so I don't know. It'd be really interesting to see how that one turns out overall, but I don't know. The idea of following the film based off the alternate ending rather than the theatrical ending feels like it's a bit much overall. But again, we'll see what happens overall. And for the most part, the movie overall works very well. I think the theatrical version is not that great, but I do like that it's a standalone ending to the storyline here. And so, I mean, I got to give it that. But again, we'll see what they can do with another film in general. But for the most part, I thought this was pretty good. Definitely worth a watch. I Am Legend. So, let's move on to that movie I've been hyping up about. The movie that was a major influence in terms of my movie reviewing life. And you would never have thought in a million years that it would have come from a film like Alvin and the Chipmunks. And that right there is the only glimmer of hope I had going into that movie back in the day because of the fact that, you know, it's the original voice actors. It's Ross Bagdasarian Jr. and his wife Janice Carmen doing the voices of Alvin, Simon and Theodore again. That's what I thought I was going in for, but nope. Just a few weeks before the movie came out, they said, we could have these people involved in here, but you know what we're going to do? We're going to bring in all these actors in here because we need the name recognition. You know, names like Justin Long and Jesse McCartney and Matthew Gray Gubler. I mean, I didn't even know who that last guy was when I saw this movie, and I found out, or at least that dude, he's on Criminal Minds. That's all I knew about it, but I'll delve into that just a second here. But in the film, you have a tree farm where you have three musically inclined chipmunks, Alvin, Simon, and Theodore. They find their tree cut down and sent to Los Angeles, and once there, they meet the frustrated songwriter David Seville, played by Jason Lee. And despite a poor house-wrecking first impression, they impress him with their singing talents. Seeing the opportunity for success, both human and chipmunks make a pact for them to sing the songs, while their ambitions prove a frustrating struggle with a difficult trio. The dream does eventually come true, after all. However, that success presents its own trials as the unscrupulous record executive Ian Hawke, played by David Cross, plans to break up this family to exploit the boys. Can Dave and the Chipmunks discover what they really value amidst the superficial glamour around them? Are you really gonna ask that question in a movie like this? I mean, I think we all know exactly what's gonna happen here, and yeah, I know what you're thinking, and you're absolutely right. These movies are absolutely terrible. The live-action films are not good movies whatsoever. And if I'm ever going to recommend one Alvin and the Chipmunks movie, it's The Chipmunk Adventure back in the 1980s. And I want to delve more into that, but we're getting close to the time that movie gets released on time about the movie's flashback. So I'll save my full review for then, but that's the Chipmunks to me. I mean, if you grew up with the Alvin and the Chipmunks show in the 80s and 90s, even if you grew up with them when they were starting off in the 50s and 60s and 70s, I mean, that's Alvin and the Chipmunks for you. This is just, let's plaster Alvin and the Chipmunks on a lackluster project that should have been so much better than this. But here's why I give this first film at least some slack overall. First of all, the movie manages to try to follow up the original story of how the Chipmunks came into David Seville's life, and that's at least more you can say about other adaptations of TV shows. At least that's one that sticks to the story originally set up for the source material for the most part. Because, yeah, I mean, Alvin and the Chipmunks essentially came into Dave's life because they eventually found their way to his home. And the show, in the 80s show, it was him, you know, finding them outside of a cabin in the middle of a snowstorm. But here it's like they find them while they're inside their Christmas tree, and they end up inside the muffin basket he takes from the record company. And yeah, the overall story itself does manage to keep it plain and simple, and the film very much is cliched riddled in terms of how the plot goes. Yeah, it does stick to a simple storyline, though, never really progressing into any of the all-out insanity and ridiculousness that the sequels will later go on to do. The acting is a very mixed bag overall, but really the one person who's really carrying the load of the film, and most of these films in general, is David Cross as Ian Hawke. Like, this is the guy that knows, yeah, he's in a bad movie, but you know what? He's giving it 110%, and he knows that he could be the one thing in this movie that could save the film overall. And yeah, David Cross is the strongest part of all these movies. Even in a terrible film like Alvin and the Chipmunks Shipwreck, he's still the best thing about the movie because he's the only one who gets the role that he's in. Like, he's the one who's really trying here. And then let's get to the Chipmunks themselves, because yeah, as I said, the casting of the Chipmunks is incredibly pointless. I think if you would have just gone with Ross Bagdasarian Jr. and Janice Carmen to reprise the roles of the Chipmunks, that would have been perfectly fine. I mean, we heard it in the original teaser trailer. It's them reprising the roles. And, you know, Bagdasarian himself even has a cameo in the movie. I mean, he's in some of the behind this, the promotionals for this. I mean, like, you had it all set up perfectly, but Fox basically had to come in and say, we need celebrities to fill out the poster. So instead of just saving money by keeping people you had already, they went with, as I mentioned, Justin Long, Jesse McCartney, who were the two biggest stars of them, and Matthew Gray Gubler. And even the biggest star of Justin Long. Like, he's not even that popular enough a leading draw back then to begin with overall. I mean, he's a great comedic actor, but he was never seen as a big box office draw. And really, not to mention, none of the marketing makes any sense, because the three they hired are nowhere they're not going to sell this movie in general, and their roles are pretty much completely pointless. I mean, just take a look at this scene in general and tell me, is there really a purpose to having these actors playing these roles that could have easily been played by the original voice actors? Honestly. Yeah. Was there even a point to doing that? No, but you know what Fox said? We're going to double it down for the sequel. We're going to get a ton of names that you are familiar with. Anna Faris, Christina Applegate, Amy Poehler for the Chipettes in the next film. Like, why? Like, why are you even bothering speeding those voices up when you could have easily paid Bagdasarian Jr. and Carmen to do the same voices all over again? Honestly. And at least I'll give them credit as far as the music goes. They do at least keep Bagdasarian and Carmen to do the songs in general, and they still do work well enough to appreciate the soundtrack more if you're a fan of the Chipmunks music, which makes the casting of Long and, McCartney even more useless, especially since Jesse McCartney is a singer himself. And I did like that during the end credits they do show off the Chipmunks record covers to show off the history of the trio since their 1958 inception overall. But with that said, the rest of the casting is pretty mediocre. Jason Lee is kind of a bore. It's hard not to watch Lee in this and not think to himself as Earl from My Name is Earl. And he really looks like he does not want to be in these movies, but he keeps going in there because they keep giving him a big-ass paycheck to work off here. And every continuing film he's in, it looks like he's not trying anymore. He's not working at all. He's not Dave Seville. Like, it was when he screams Alvin, like, you heard it in the teaser trailer. That's the most that comes close to him sounding like Dave Seville. And don't even get me started on his love interest in the movie. You know that chick from Supercross, that movie you never remembered until I mentioned again? Yeah, Cameron Richardson's the love interest in this movie. She's 100% pointless. She has no character development at all. And we're supposed to feel for her because she's the plain love interest and that's it? Like, this is one of the worst love interest I've ever seen in a movie, because you cannot buy her chemistry with Jason Lee at all. Like, it's amazing how there is zero chemistry between these two whatsoever, and they just threw her in there because, we need to have a love interest in here. Yeah, there's a couple of jokes, there's a lot of jokes in here that are pretty lame. Sometimes you get a good, fun moment here and there. Like, I do like the one gross out humor joke, the raisin joke. Is actually kind of funny overall, especially for Dave's reaction. I mean, usually I don't like gross out humor jokes, but that one actually kind of worked. And again, when David Cross is on screen, you get the best laughs of the entire film. But yeah, overall, I don't think it's as bad as everyone says it is. Yeah, it's not a good movie, and I would definitely recommend The Chipmunk Adventure first before I would say watch these movies any day of the week. But I mean, it's not that bad, but there's nothing about it that stands out well about it at all. I guess I could honestly say that it's just a passable film. I think kids will like it. I think there's some stuff that the adults can get enjoyment out of, but other than that, though, there's really nothing else about the film that makes it worth it in the end. So, why exactly does this movie hold a special place in my heart whenever it comes to my film review career? Well, let's just say this. This is around 2007, and, I was just coming out of high school the previous summer, and, I was going to community college, and, it was a very rough time for me at community college, because I thought I was getting more out of the community college journey than I ended up getting. I was there for 3 years, and I took these classes. I thought I was going to continue doing movie reviews like I did in high school, but nothing ever opened up, and there were no classes where I could take that I could easily make that work. And yeah, it was a very stressful time overall, and it didn't help that the teachers there, some of the classes that I took during that time just really they were more egregious and more impatient than is more like they were more, for lack of a better word, they were more assholes when they needed to be. Because yeah, there were definitely times when I was taking these classes and I was doing the best I can, and it still wasn't enough. I'll never forget the one year I had a math class where I had a teacher that always told me to show my work all the time. And even when I showed my work, and even put it on the computer or the paper to show that I'd shown my work, it still wasn't enough, even if it was the correct answer. Like, they wanted me to tell me to ask me how did I get the answer all the time. But it's like, it doesn't matter. I showed my work. I showed you how I did it. And it's just like, no, show me how you did it right in front of me. It's just like, what do you want me to do? Like, it was, bottom line, it was a very stressful time for me, those 3 years. And 2008 was the worst of the worst. That 2008, mostly the fall of 2008, that was the roughest time ever. And I bring all of this up because this actually ties back into Alvin and the Chipmunks. And it does this because when I was looking for some reviews online on YouTube for this, I came across a little group from Austin, Texas, that was doing movie reviews on there, and I knew nothing about them, but then I stumbled across their Alvin and the Chipmunks review, and I think you can get a good idea if you've been following my videos here about one of my biggest influences. I think you know who exactly I'm talking about.
Got $7.50 to pay. Everybody now.
I can't tell you how many years I have waited for a live-action Alvin and the Chipmunks movie.
Yeah, right.
See, bro, there's really no reason to make this movie other than the fact that they're running out of licensed properties to make movies of. And, you know, Jason Lee is Dave Seville, failed songwriter, who discovers talking chipmunks at his front door.
Okay, let me just ask you, what powers do they possess that make them talk?
Yeah, I mean, is it a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles type of effect?
Yeah, the chemicals fall on them? Do we ever, like, find out that Dave is high on some shit and this ain't really happening? He finds, like, 3 dead rats that he just imagines them like that's talking chipmunks.
That's right. Alvin and the Chipmunks was the first Spill.com review I ever saw, and that's the one that got me to go to their website. And honestly, the rest of my life was eventually changed. It was eventually changed from that point forward, because that's because of Spill.com and because of what Corey Coleman, Cyrus, Leon, and Carlisle, or now as now we all know them, Chris Cox, Martin Thomas, C. Robert Cargill, of course, the co-host 3000. Like, because of those guys, they were eventually part of the big reason why I eventually went back to film reviewing, because I joined their website after that. I was one of the members of that website, and I found a place where I could continue putting movie reviews out there. And not only that, they really got me through a very tough time in my life, going through those 3 years in community college. And eventually it led to the creation of the site within a site that became the Reviewing Network. And then when the Spill website unfortunately shut down at the end of 2013, the plan to go to a full website within a year had to be cut down to 6 months. And that's when I spent most of my time in December, after the site had gone down, saving as much as I could. And eventually, it led to the site that I have now officially call home here. And of course, that eventually led to the YouTube channel that you're watching right now. So, if Alvin and the Chipmunks did not exist, I probably would not be sitting here right now doing movie reviews. I mean, I'd probably be finding a way to do it in some way, shape, or form. But if it had not been for this movie, and had not been me looking for that review, one of those reviews back then, I would have never found Spill.com, nor would I have eventually found a way to bring the Reviewing Network to life. And here we are. I mean, I owe a lot to what those guys did when I found that review. I mean, they were the reason why. They were the reason why the site is now what it is, and they were the reason why I got back to film reviewing. And they were the guys that, kept me in check and gave me some hope going forward. I mean, during that tough time I was in, I owe a lot to what Corey and those guys did for me. And when the site went down, I told them the same thing when the site went down. And I got a nice message from Corey that I still hold to this very day. I mean, it's really like they really saved my butt big time, because I would not be standing here right now if it wasn't for them. And yeah, it was a very tough time in my life, but they got me through it, and the rest is history. And here we are. So I owe a lot to them for what those guys did. And it all started with me finding that review for Alvin and the Chipmunks, and eventually finding how funny these guys can really be. A lot of them are now on other websites. Double Toasted, One of Us. Surely there's some other ones I completely forgot about. Rage Select. At least I know some of them go on there. But find these guys' stuff here. You can find them all over the place. I'll even leave links down below if I need to. But definitely seek these guys out, and definitely look for the old Spill reviews online, because they are definitely out there. But yeah, I owe a lot to these guys, and it was because of their review of this movie that that this whole thing is now where it is right now. So I owe those guys I owe those guys a lot for getting me through a tough time, and I thank those guys every day for the rest of my life. For that, because like I said, if this movie had not come out and I had not found that review, we would not be sitting here right now on this channel. So yeah, I'm eternally grateful for that, and that's why this movie does hold a very special place in my heart, because yeah, it got me through it. Is because without that review, I don't know where I really would be right now if I didn't have this website and all that. But yeah, I feel very, very grateful because of this review that I found for this movie through Spill.com. And yeah, I'm getting a little emotional because yeah, it still holds up for me after all these years, nearly 20 years later. I never will forget the day I found that, and it changed my life forever. So yeah, that's why this movie holds a special place in my heart. As bad as it is, it's not even that bad. It's just not as good as something like The Chipmunk Adventure. It's a movie that I'll always remember because it was the one that welcomed me into the world of Spill.com and found the reviews and turned my life around completely. So yeah, that's all I have to say about Alvin and the Chipmunks. Yeah, not a good movie overall, but it's a very important movie in my life overall. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on to our next movie, and that is The Perfect Holiday. Yeah, it's not a very good sign if you're releasing a Christmas movie less than 2 weeks before Christmas. I mean, once in a while you get that movie that actually does work, like The Family Stone or The Muppet Christmas Carol, but 9 times out of 10, if you're releasing a movie a few weeks before Christmas that's not one that's being seen on television, chances are that it's not going to be a good movie. And sure enough, here's one where we have that type of a film where you have a movie that's a comedy starring Morris Chestnut, Gabrielle Union, Charlie Murphy, Cat Williams, Faison Love, Terrence Howard, and Queen Latifah. And Gabrielle Union plays a woman who wants for Christmas to meet a nice man. So when her little girl shares her smitten wish with a mall Santa, played by Morris Chestnut, he does his best to make her dreams come true in this delightful treat for the whole family to enjoy. I'm reading this off of IMDb, and this isn't me saying this and all, but I did want to say something about Faison Love. It's just like, you're already fat, dude. You don't need the fucking Santa suit on. But like, hey, it's their idea of comedy, and yeah, comedy is in quotation marks comedy, because this ain't that much of a comedy, and not even that good of a movie in general. It's a bland movie. Like, it's a movie that I feel like is one of those movies that, it has the PG rating overall, but they're clearly not watching this movie at the MPAA, because there's nothing about this movie that's PG. It puts it in the same category as something like, My Little Pony the movie or Inside Out 2. Just one of the many problems with the MPAA in general. But on top of that, the movie itself just isn't all that good. It's a pretty bland movie that has nothing of value to it whatsoever. It really has no idea what type of a film it wants to be, or what kind of a Christmas movie it wants to be overall. And it doesn't help that these people can usually turn in a very good performance overall, but even a movie like this, it's not enough to save the film, because I don't even think the movie really knows what its main story should be in general. It just feels so cluttered. There's nothing about it that's hilarious. I mean, the names in this movie are so bland and forgettable. Like, you have a P. Diddy knockoff, but guess what his name is? Jay Jizzy. Like, that's the level of intelligence that this movie has. This is the film that should have been seen on Lifetime or BET. It should not have been blown up on the big screen like this. And yeah, it's a film that came and went. It was largely forgotten. And unlike those movies that opened up after Christmas that I mentioned, Muppet Christmas Carol and The Family Stone, which are good movies, this thing came and went, and it shows nothing of value whatsoever. And yeah, for some reason, it still shows up on the 25 Days of Christmas on Freeform every year, which I don't know why. Like, that time slot could be saved for much better movies and specials than this pile of garbage here. Yeah, this is a direct-to-video movie blown up for the big screen, or something that should have been just shown on Lifetime or BET, but no, they put it on the big screen because this young company, Yari Film Group, thought they were going to have their next big Christmas classic that's going to be shown every year and make a lot of money, and no, didn't do any of that whatsoever. So avoid The Perfect Holiday like it's like the plague. So with that said, let's go ahead and get to some indie movies here. Let's start with the first one we have here, and that is The Kite Runner. This is, of course, is based off the 2003 book of the same name, and it follows the story of Amir, a well-to-do boy from the Wazir Abu Khan district of Kabul, who is tormented by the guilt of abandoning his friend Hassan. The story is set in the backdrop of tumultuous events following the fall of the monarchy in Afghanistan through the Soviet military intervention, the mass exodus of Afghans returning to Pakistan and the United States, and the Taliban regime. And yeah, this is a film that was very timely back then too, because we were still in the Gulf, in the the war with Afghanistan, and it's a movie where a lot of things happened in this film. Like, there was a lot of things going on in this particular movie, some that were actually kind of seen as controversial at the time. The biggest one being the child actors who were involved in all these situations that they were dealing with when they were making the movie, and it actually forced the studio to force the movie back until this weekend. And the controversy itself actually led to the film being banned from cinemas and distribution in Afghanistan altogether. So yeah, this is a very controversial film, but the film itself is just okay. Honestly, it's a movie that I look at and I'm looking at it just like, there's nothing really wrong about it per se. Everybody's doing the best they can here, but it just feels like they're trying a little too hard to create the next big epic film. Like, they're trying to create something on the level of something like, Gandhi or The Last Emperor, which are much better movies in general, obviously. But it's a film I feel like they're trying to go so hard for an Oscar. I think the pieces are definitely there. This is directed by Mark Forster, who did Stranger Than Fiction. He also did Stay. He also did Finding Neverland. This is written by David Benioff, who, of course, would later go on to create Game of Thrones, and features a pretty good cast overall, and a very engaging storyline overall. But, I think the book was done a whole lot better. I remember having to read the book for one of the classes I took in community college, and yeah, it was an engaging read overall, and I think this film had a lot of tough tasks to try to capture that magic from the book in general and bring it to the big screen. And God bless them, the actors are trying overall to make it work, and the director's doing everything he can, but it just feels like they're trying way too hard to go for that Oscar overall. It doesn't feel like they're really going in and trying to make a really good a masterpiece of a film overall. They're just trying to make a movie based off a very popular book. And again, it's not a bad movie per se, but it's just not enough to say that, yes, this should have been one of the award contenders. But no, it's a film that's just, it's okay. It's a good movie. I'd say if you want to see some of Mark Forster's work, it's definitely a film you should check out. I think it definitely is good for a one-time watch. But other than that, though, there's really no real reason to watch this movie in general, except for the first time you see it. It's a very tough film to get through at times, but I mean, it's fine for what it is. Nothing too spectacular, nothing too amazing, but feels like it could have been so much more. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on to the last film we have here, and that's Francis Ford Coppola's latest film, Youth Without Youth. It's funny, I think that's what they were telling Francis Ford Coppola when he was making his later movies. You're running out of time. And I feel like it started with this movie here, because this is the first film Coppola has directed in 10 years, since The Rainmaker, which is a really good movie, and a nice reprieve after something like Jack in 1996, which nearly killed his career overall. But in this movie, this takes place and starts in 1938 with an elderly Romanian professor contemplating suicide. He's struck by lightning and consequently finds himself rejuvenated, and he subsequently develops psychic powers, which attracts the attention of Nazi agents. He flees to Switzerland, where he meets a reincarnation of his past lover, and he discovers information both about her various past incarnations and about the evolutionary potential of humanity. So yeah, you can see this is where Francis Ford Coppola is starting to get very pretentious with his works overall. And yeah, the film itself, unfortunately, is a very pretentious and very long movie that doesn't really amount to anything overall. And it really is not that good overall. It's a film that definitely shows that the magic with Francis Ford Coppola, sadly, is starting to go away. And yeah, for your first movie in 10 years, you better deliver something much better than a movie like this that feels very bland, feels very pretentious, feels very boring. I mean, this is a long movie. Granted, it's 2 hours. Only a little over 2 hours long, but it feels like it's much more than that. It's a very bland, boring movie that has nothing of value whatsoever, and feels like it's completely devoid of what makes Francis Ford Coppola the great director that he was back in the day. And yeah, like I said, this is the first film that really began the eventual downfall of him as a director, because after this he did Tetra, which was not a good movie, Twix, which wasn't very good, and then just recently we had Megalopolis, which was up there as my second worst movie of last year. And it just goes to show that the dude is clearly losing a lot of clearly losing a lot of his muster overall, and this was the first real sign that yeah, this guy's career is going off on the deep end, and not in a good way. And it definitely shows on here. It's a very pretentious movie, a very boring movie, a very bland film overall. Just nothing of value about it whatsoever. It's a film I would say definitely skip it, because it's definitely not worth it in the end. So yeah, a hard skip on Youth Without Youth. And so with all that said, we wrap up another edition of Time About the Movies, and we are just 2 weeks away from ending 2007. We've got the week before Christmas, the Friday before Christmas, and we've got 6 notable movies to take a look at. A lot of big blockbusters, including Nicolas Cage in the sequel to National Treasure Book of Secrets, Tom Hanks, Julia Roberts, and Philip Seymour Hoffman starring in Aaron Sorkin's written, Mike Nichols directed Charlie Wilson's War, Tim Burton and Johnny Depp reunite again, this time on Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street. Hilary Swank and Gerard Butler star in a romantic comedy, P.S. I Love You, or romantic drama, I should say. One of the most underrated comedies ever made came out this weekend, too. John C. Reilly starring as Dewey Cox in Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox Story. And also we have a comedy that was supposed to be a much bigger release, but they realized, oh my god, this absolutely looks horrible, so let's dump it on Christmas. Jessica Simpson starring in Blonde Ambition, basically a modern-day remake of Private Benjamin, but nowhere near as good. So we'll take a look at those 6 movies coming up on tomorrow's show. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And if you want to see more videos like this, please go ahead and hit the playlist on the next page. Check out the previous episode. And also, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, notification button, and the bell. And also, you hit that bell, you get updates on when new videos come out. And we do post new videos here every day. So with all that said, I am off. I will see you guys next time. And until then, as always, take care.